Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon. I want to welcome everybody to the Town of Wakefield 2024 Memorial Day ceremony. And it's my honor to just mention a couple guests that we have here today that have checked in with the podium. Representative Donald Wong, thank you very much for coming. Representative Lipper Garabedian is here in spirit this afternoon. We have the chair of the Wakefield Town Councilor, Councilor Michael McLean. I haven't seen the vice chair, but Ed Dombrowski, Councilor Douglas Butler, Maureen Butt, and Councilor Jonathan Chimes. And of course, Councilor Robert E. Vincent, who's a commander of the United States Navy, retired. Thank you for joining us. And Councilor John Carney. I haven't seen him this morning, but John is also a native of Wakefield, Massachusetts, and a veteran of the United States Army. Thank you, John. From our schools, Dr. Lyons, the teachers, and the administration, thank you very much for everything that you've done at Wakefield Memorial High School, the Galvin Middle School, and our elementary schools throughout town. Town Administrator Steve Mayo, don't have eyes on you, but thank you for your help and support. Our Veteran Service Officer, David Mangan. Gold Star Wives, Joan Hurton, Jean Joyce, Joyce Benson, Pam Hart, and Marianne Dennehy is not here at the ceremony, but she is the president of the Gold Star Wives in Massachusetts and a member of the Wakefield Veterans Advisory Board. Ladies, thank you very much for coming. Our town historian, Nancy Bertrand. I don't think she's here, but I hope that she gets a chance to see this after it concludes and airs. And I thank her for the work that she has done as our historian. We have several chaplains, but two this morning. I've got Lieutenant Colonel Robert LaRoe, who's a chaplain with the United States Army, retired, up in the front. And we have the Reverend Brett Johnson, the rector of the Emmanuel Episcopal Church here in Wakefield. I also want to thank the members of the Veterans Advisory Board, Chris Olson, who's the vice chair and is also still serving in the Massachusetts National Guard, Joe DeLilio, sorry about that, Joe, but he serves as the secretary, William Curran. William is also Bill's a fireman and helping us today with the colors. Daniel Benjamin, who's here with Robert Ettinger, Dale Finlay, Mark Young, and our newest member, Joseph Jacoby. The Wakefield Girl Scouts, and we have the Wakefield Boy Scouts from Troop 701 also here with us supporting the event. This afternoon, we have musical performers from Wakefield Memorial High School. Graduating seniors, Nadia Collins, Caroline Dill, and Lila Hathaway. And these students have supported our ceremonies for the past several years. I wish them well in their life after Wakefield Memorial High School, and congratulations on your graduation next week. Down on the lower common, I want to say hello to Captain Brown and the soldiers from the 101st Field Artillery Regiment. They've joined us today with a battery of 3 M105 howitzers for a formal 21-gun salute to conclude the program. I also want to reach out to members of the Chamber of Commerce. Thank you very much for what you do in our community. You've connected me to what we do in the Navy and the military. Thank you very much. More about that in June at your annual meeting. The folks at the Main Street Grill and Tap House, I want to thank them for everything that they do for veterans here in our town. I couldn't set this up myself without the help of the Department of Public Works and the leadership that Dennis Fazio has done for us, both at the cemetery on Friday and also here this afternoon. Thank you very much, Dennis. And of course, the Wakefield Daily Item, thank you very much for the help and assistance that you've done over the past couple weeks to get the information about this program out to the public. And we do have one very important person by the name of Ian McDermott and the crew from WCAT that are here today filming, recording, and helping with the sound to do a ceremony for both Upper and Lower Common. Thank you very much, Ian and the crew from WCAT. Ladies and gentlemen, also, let's give a big round of applause for our guest, Ms. Kristen F. Bauer, a retired diplomat serving with the United States Department of State. Kristen, thank you very much for coming. And of course, Brigadier General Paul Miner, who's the Assistant Adjutant General for the Massachusetts National Guard. Sir, thank you very much for joining us today. And I'd be remiss if I didn't say thank you to the veterans in Wakefield and surrounding towns. Thank you very, very much for joining us today, and thank you very much for your service. We're all here to gather and join to remember the fallen, those that were killed in action and those that remain missing in action. And just out of curiosity and a show of hands, are there any veterans that are here today who served in World War II? Charlie, ladies and gentlemen, thank you, Charlie. Thank you very much. Are there any veterans who served in the Korean War that are here with us today? Veterans from the Vietnam era. Veterans from the Cold War era. Veterans from the Global War on Terror. And of course, I did omit, I didn't mean to do this, but the Gulf War era, Gulf War I. Thank you. I caught myself. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise as Troop 701 posts the colors. Please remain standing while Dale Finlay from the Veterans Advisory Board comes up to the podium to help us with the Pledge of Allegiance.
Good morning, everyone. You can uncover. I pledge allegiance, flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you.
A short note about the poem Flanders Field. Please remain standing. It's written by John McCrae. Flanders Field is one of the most quoted poems from World War I. The poem references red poppies. It's a weed that thrives in an area of disturbed soil. The poppy is the first plant that grows over the graves of fallen soldiers, producing a flower. The poppy is the world's most recognized memorial flower, honoring soldiers killed in battle. Remembrance is the theme of this afternoon's Memorial Day program. Today we remember the fallen, as Dave Mangan recites in Flanders Field.
In Flanders Field, the poppies blow between the crosses, rows on row, that mark our place, and in the sky, the larks still bravely singing fly. Scarce heard amid the guns below. We are the dead. Short days ago, we lived, felt dawn, saw sunset glow, loved and were loved, and now we lie in Flanders Field. Take up our quarrel with the foe. To you from failing hands we throw. The torch be yours to hold it high. If he break faith with us who die, we shall not sleep, though poppies grow in Flanders Field.
Thank you, Dale and David. Nutty Collins from Wakefield Memorial High School, who's a graduating senior, will sing the national anthem.
Oh, say, can you see by the dawn's early light what so proudly we held at the twilight's last gleaming, whose broad stripes and bright stars through the perilous fight o'er the ramparts we watched were so gallantly streaming, and the rockets red glare, the bombs bursting in air, gave proof through the night that our flag was still there. Oh, say, does that star-spangled banner yet wave o'er the land of the free and the home of the brave?
Thank you, Nadia. Please remain standing while Lieutenant Colonel Robert LaRoe, the chaplain of the United States Army, delivers the invocation for the ceremony.
Shall we pray? Lord of hosts, this Memorial Day we recall the ultimate price paid for freedom, the noble sacrifice of our nation's military, and we pray for their loved ones. You have shown us how sacrifice and loss precede liberty. Lord, bring closure to those who replay the trauma of the battlefield over and over, who find it challenging to transition to a more normal life after such a defining experience. Help us to show heartfelt appreciation for a mission well done. In the midst of this weekend of ball games, barbecues, mall sales, and leisure activities, help us to reflect on the individual human cost of preserving freedom in our most troubled world. Bless our nation and help us to acknowledge you, the author of liberty. We honor our fallen men and women, and we commit to keeping the cause for which they died alive and well. All this we pray in your strong and mighty name. Amen.
Thank you, Chaplain LaRoe, and thank you for your continued service, supporting our troops, veterans, and their families. Please go ahead and take your seats. The town of Wakefield is honored to receive a proclamation from Governor Maura Healey. Please welcome Dale Finley to read the proclamation from a governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts.
Thank you, Paul. A proclamation. Whereas while the nation was still recovering from the Civil War, people in cities and towns across the country gathered to honor the soldiers who had given their lives, celebrating the first Decoration Day. And whereas after World War I, the nation came together again to honor those who had fallen in the service of their country, renamed Memorial Day. The last Monday in May, when it is the people remember the honor the memory of all the men and women who fought and died in all the American wars and conflicts. Whereas throughout the country's history, thousands of Massachusetts residents have fought in wars and conflicts to defend our safety and our way of life. And whereas their legacy of patriotism and dedication to country is an inspiration to all Americans, and whereas it is appropriate that all Massachusetts residents remember the bravery of those who gave their lives so that their sacrifice serve as a reminder to the rest of us of the cost of our freedom. Now, I, Maura T. Healey, Governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, do hereby proclaim May 27, 2024 to be Memorial Day, and urge all residents of the Commonwealth to take cognizance of this event and participate fittingly in its observance. Given at the Executive Chamber in Boston this 27th day of May in the year 2024, and of the independence of the United States of America, the 247th, by Her Excellency, Maura T. Healey. Thank you.
Thank you, Dale. Our first speaker this afternoon is recently installed as the chair of the Wakefield Town Council. Council Michael McLean is going to offer us greetings on behalf of the town of Wakefield. And I want to say congratulations on your new role. Ladies and gentlemen, Councilor Michael McLean.
Major Consigliere, EAB members, Veteran Service Officer Magnan, our high school seniors performing today, our high school seniors joining the military, including two are here today joining the Naval Academy in West Point, General Miner, Kristen Bauer, Town Administrator Mayo, Town Council members in attendance, all of our veterans and all of our citizens. I thank you very much for the privilege of addressing you today. Because today we honor the hundreds of thousands who have gone before us and paid the ultimate sacrifice so that we can be free. I'm specifically pleased that we're doing some focus on Vietnam today. I was a little young for the draft, being, the young age of 66 at present. I do recall my older brother going to the local pub for the annual event where the balls were spinning and the draft was being decided and who got what number. And I know that our Vietnam veterans really operated in a different environment than some of our post-Vietnam era veterans have. And there wasn't a lot of thank you for your service being said to the veterans when they got back from Vietnam. And I just want to especially recognize you folks today. Welcome as well to the Gold Star mothers, the Gold Star families. Captain Callanan this morning eloquently spoke about what happens, the legacy that's left behind after a hero falls, and the family members that are left behind. I apologize to anybody I missed. I apologize to anybody who had to listen to me twice today. But my family story goes back to my parents both being born in 23. They were the World War II generation. And I had mentioned this morning at the West Side that the McLean boys all came home. So on Memorial Day, I think more on my mother's side of the family. My mother, Jean Riley, her first cousin, my grandfather's nephew, Jerry Riley, was a right-handed pitcher for South Park High School just before the war. And my grandfather said he was every bit as good as the left-handed pitcher, a young man named Warren Spahn in Buffalo, New York. That's, for those of you who are too young to remember Warren Spahn, it's S-P-A-H-N. Consult your cell phones, but not right now, please. Spahn served as well, though. He was drafted in 42 after his rookie year with the Boston Braves. He served from 42 to 46, which is quite a thing when you think about it. He was in the Combat Engineering 276 Battalion. When the Germans couldn't destroy the bridge over the Rhine in Remagen, he was part of the combat engineers repairing the bridge under fire. He earned a Bronze Star and Battle of the Bulge. He was also Purple Heart. Fortunately, hit his foot, not his pitching arm. The shrapnel that he was struck by. He came back to 363 wins, Cy Young Awards, multiple 20-game win seasons, and a stellar pitching career. Jerry Riley, the uncle I never met, did not come back. He volunteered at age 17. Either my grandfather or his dad signed for him because he wasn't of age. And he, by 1942, when Spahn was drafted, Jerry was already in the Pacific. He served on a light cruiser, and he used to read my grandfather's letters by moonlight in his gun battery. He was a GMC 3, gunner's mate, third class. And he wrote back to my grandfather that he had met 5 other Irishmen, the 5 Sullivan brothers. And Jerry and the 5 Sullivan brothers, on November 13th, 1942, their light cruiser Juno, USS Juno, was hit by a torpedo. In the magazine section, the boat went down in almost no time at all. The crew was somewhere around 693 men. The 100 or so wound up in the water, and only, for various reasons, were not rescued right away, and only 10 ultimately survived. So when I think about the sacrifice that Jerry made young guy with, as they all were, with everything to live for. That's what I think about on Memorial Day. Those who have gone before us and who have paid that ultimate price so that we can live in a free society. So may they rest in peace. God bless Wakefield. God bless their souls, and God bless America. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councilor McLean, for your Memorial Day greeting. I just want to also introduce Senator Lewis, who's here. Thank you very much, sir, for joining. Our next guest is Brigadier General Minor. General Minor is a senior chaplain for the Massachusetts National Guard, serving as an assistant to the Adjutant General, advising senior leaders on diversity. General Minor assists and advises the Adjutant General in the performance of his duties. He serves as co-chair of the Joint Diversity Executive Committee for Massachusetts, Region 1, and serves on the National Joint Diversity Executive Committee. He seeks to further the Adjutant General's priorities of caring for our people, fielding winning teams, encouraging innovation, and building enduring relationships. Today, General Minor joins us to present the Massachusetts Medal of Fidelity to 3 Gold Star wives. The Medal of Fidelity complements the Medal of Liberty, which is presented to the families of Massachusetts veterans who die of combat-related physical injuries. While similar to the Medal of Liberty, the Medal of Fidelity recognizes service-connected injuries related to exposure to harmful substances like Agent Orange and conditions such as Gulf War syndrome, in addition to combat-related mental illness and post-traumatic stress disorder, or PTSD. The creation of a Medal of Liberty allows the Commonwealth to recognize the enormous toll that illnesses and injuries outside of combat can take, not only on the service member, but also on their families and their loved ones. This is the first medal of its kind given by the Commonwealth to recognize veterans who have lost their lives as a result of service-connected illnesses and injuries. The Medal of Fidelity represents our commitment to supporting our service members after their military service, honoring the sacrifices the troops and their families make in their service to our nation. This afternoon, receiving the Massachusetts Medal of Fidelity are Joan Hurton, Jean Joyce, and Joyce Benson. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Brigadier General Paul L. Minor as he says a few words before the presentation of the Massachusetts Medal of Fidelity.
Good afternoon. As King Henry VIII said to one of his many wives, I won't keep you long. We'll get right to the awards. The only thing I would add is that Massachusetts is the only state in the Union that presents this type of award. And so we are honored to be able to present this today to Joan Horton, Jean Joyce, and Joyce Benson. Would you come forward, please? To all who see these presents, greeting. This is to certify that the Governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts has presented the Medal of Fidelity for Sergeant Bruce W. Benson, United States Air Force. Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 33, Section 67B. There shall be a Medal of Fidelity which shall be awarded to the next of kin of service men and women from the Commonwealth who died as a result of either combat-related post-traumatic stress disorder or other disorder approved by the Adjutant General, condition resulting from a service-connected traumatic brain injury, or combat-connected disease, condition, or injury related to the exposure to harmful toxins, herbicides, agents, or materials, where the exposure occurred while serving in the armed forces of the United States, active or reserve components of or the Massachusetts National Guard, signed by Governor Healy and Gary W. Keefe, Major General, the Adjutant General of Massachusetts.
Gene? Gene?
General Minor is presenting Joyce Benson. Joyce is receiving the Massachusetts Medal of Fidelity on behalf of her husband, Vietnam veteran Bruce Benson, United States Air Force, who passed away from a service-connected injury. David's got the next one. Jean Joyce. Jean Joyce is receiving the Massachusetts Medal of Fidelity on behalf of her husband, Vietnam veteran William Joyce, the United States Coast Guard. He passed away on August 8th, 2013, from a service-connected disability. Joan Hurton. Joan is receiving the Massachusetts Medal of Fidelity on behalf of her husband, a Vietnam-era veteran who served from 1968 to 1971. Thomas Hurton, United States Army, passed away on September 3rd, 2023, from a service-connected injury. Ladies and gentlemen, please rise and show our gratitude for Joan Hurton, Jean Joyce, and Joyce Benson for the sacrifice and honorable military service of Thomas Hurton, William Joyce, and Bruce Benson. Go ahead and take your seats. Our guest speaker today is Ms. Kristen F. Bauer. I first met Kristen as a guest speaker at lunch with the Greater Boston chapter of the Military Order of World Wars at the Union Oyster House. She delivered a genuine perspective about Vietnam today. Our military, the Department of Defense, works with our diplomats, the Department of State, every day to achieve the best outcomes for the United States of America. The mission of the United States Department of State is to protect and promote United States security, prosperity, and democratic values, and shape an international environment in which all Americans can thrive. Kristen Bauer served as a senior diplomat for 27 years with the United States Department of State. She crafted policies and programs to promote democracy, and human rights, counter violent extremism, and foster inclusive economic growth. She oversaw thousands of staff members and millions of dollars in grants and budgets in cross-cultural settings. Ms. Bauer served as a Deputy Chief of Mission, Deputy Ambassador at the U.S. Embassy in the Republic of the Union of Burma from 2015 to 2017. Previously, Ms. Bauer served as a Deputy Chief of Mission in Jakarta, Indonesia, as a Consul General in Surabaya, Indonesia. Earlier, she held the positions of the Counselor for Political and Economic Affairs at the U.S. Embassy in Oslo, Norway, and the Deputy Chief of Mission at the U.S. Embassy in Vientiane, Laos. She also held diplomatic posts in the United States missions in Pretoria, South Africa, Hanoi, Vietnam, London, United Kingdom, and Bangkok, Thailand. Ms. Bauer earned her bachelor's degree in history and international relations from Randolph-Macon Women's College in Virginia in 1984, and her JD from Yale Law School in Connecticut in 1987. She practiced law in Boston prior to joining the Foreign Service. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me to welcome Ms. Kristen Bauer.
Thank you for inviting me to join you today in this Memorial Day remembrance. Let me just adjust a bit. It's truly an honor to be here with all of you and to be surrounded by these memorials to those who sacrificed so much that we could gather here in peace. Our theme for today is remembrance, and I've been asked to speak about remembrance in terms of one of our wars, Vietnam. And the timing is appropriate because it's just over 50 years since US combat forces left Vietnam. And to properly remember, we need to look back not only at the war, but also at the evolution of our relationship with Vietnam. And that's what I want to focus on today, because this evolution grew out of the legacy of those who fought and the veterans and the family members of the fallen who guided our nation to a new relationship with Vietnam. I first went to Vietnam in 1991. I flew into Ho Chi Minh City, which is formerly Saigon, to help process people through the Orderly Departure Program, which was a program established to help people leave without going to the boats. When I got there, we had to stay on a ship because there were no hotels. The electricity went out all the time. There was hardly any private business. There were very few cars. Most people got around by walking or by bike. People were eager to escape, and so they would slip us notes every time we went outside asking for help. Now you can compare that image to the image of just a few months ago when I went there for a wedding. Tourists from across the world are visiting. There are hotels of every kind. Shops abound, cars and motorcycles jam the streets, and high-rises tower over the cities. Not only is the economy at an all-time high, but in many ways, the relationship between the US and Vietnam is too. President Biden and Secretary Blinken both went last year separately to visit. And Secretary Blinken said, "This is one of the most dynamic, one of the most important relationships we have had. It's had a remarkable trajectory over the last couple decades." So how did that happen? How in such a short period of time did Vietnam go from desperately poor to booming? How did we go from fighting in Vietnam to being partners? When our troops pulled out and when South Vietnam fell, there was much bitterness. We all know that many veterans had difficult homecomings, and many Americans were haunted by the prospect of POW MIAs left behind. And meanwhile, in Vietnam, there was trouble at home and in their neighborhood. For example, their lands and cities had obviously suffered heavy damage, and injuries from unexploded ordnance, UXO, was common. The government in Hanoi sent hundreds of thousands of South Vietnamese people to re-education camps. Hanoi also tried to transform South Vietnam along communist lines, nationalizing commerce, taking land away from individual farmers. And the result was exactly what you would expect and what we've seen around the world. The economy suffered, agricultural production declined dramatically, and Vietnam flirted with famine. All of this caused one of the largest migrations of modern time, the Vietnamese boat people. Over 1.5 million people risked their lives to flee. And in the region, it was difficult too. 2 weeks before Saigon fell, Cambodia was overtaken by the Pol Pot regime. They were suspicious of the Vietnamese, began attacking them. Vietnam responded, ultimately overthrowing the regime. And then China, in punishment for that, attacked Vietnam along their shared border. And if we look at the relationship with the United States, following the war, the US established a trade embargo against Vietnam and required a full accounting of all POW MIAs before any normalization talks could be considered. So that's where things stood, not long after the war. The Vietnamese economy was falling apart, Vietnam was fighting with its neighbors, and there was no chance of reestablishing a relationship with the United States. But unlike many governments faced with such a crisis, the Vietnamese government did actually do something about it. They recognized that communism would not modernize the country, and they introduced reform. Central planning was abandoned, the economy was opened up, and collectivized farms ended. Rice production rebounded dramatically, making Vietnam one of the largest rice producers in the world. In the cities, the factories began producing items, and most people's lives improved. Incomes rose, with the poverty rate going from 70% to 4%. Literacy improved to an impressive 97%, and life expectancy rose to 75 years. Paralleling this was an equally dramatic story of the US-Vietnamese relationship. Remember to right back after the war, when due to the invasion of Cambodia, the re-education camps, the boat people, and above all, the overarching issue of POW MIAs, Americans viewed Vietnam very negatively. But with the easing of the Cold War, the George H.W. Bush administration saw a chance for peace in Cambodia and improved cooperation on POW MIA issues. So in 1991, the Bush administration offered Vietnam a roadmap towards normalization, proposing that Vietnam would increase POW MIA cooperation, empty the re-education camps, help create peace in Cambodia, and in turn, the United States would provide humanitarian assistance and ease the embargo. Although Vietnam never formally accepted the roadmap, they largely followed it. So in 1991, Vietnam permitted the United States to establish a POW MIA accounting office in Hanoi and joined us in supporting a Cambodian peace agreement. The US then delivered humanitarian assistance to Vietnam, reduced restrictions on Vietnamese diplomats at the UN, and loosened constraints on American travel to Vietnam. And Vietnam also allowed the Orderly Departure Program, that program that I was working on, to process more people as refugees, which eased the boat crisis. So in early 1994, President Clinton lifted the embargo, and in 1995, we opened the embassy in Hanoi, and Vietnam opened theirs in Washington, D.C. I and my family were part of the first group of diplomats to be posted at the U.S. Embassy in Hanoi. We were quite surprised. People welcomed us, comparing Americans very favorably to the Russians or the Chinese. In fact, Vietnamese veterans really wanted to talk to American veterans. And some of the most moving meetings that I was a part of were between these two sets of veterans who seemed sometimes to have more in common with each other than they did with me, who could barely remember the war. Normalization of the relationship depended very heavily on so-called humanitarian issues and the involvement of American veterans and families of the fallen. Humanitarian issues are those issues considered outside kind of the normal range of a diplomatic relationship. So countries can talk about those, even if they can't talk about anything else. So for Vietnam, this involved both the POW MIA issue and the UXO Agent Orange issue. Vietnamese cooperation on POW MIA accounting was critical to enabling progress. And although there were influential groups in the United States that felt Vietnam was not cooperating sufficiently, a growing number of veterans and family members felt otherwise. Influential senators, led by former POW John McCain and Vietnamese war veteran John Kerry, were convinced Vietnam was cooperating and that even more could get done with a closer bilateral relationship. And Americans were also concerned about understanding more about the impacts of Agent Orange, because that was affecting veterans at home. And they were aware of the humanitarian crisis caused by UXO. So therefore, humanitarian assistance for those issues was politically possible. And as a result of these humanitarian efforts, the United States and Vietnam have been able to account for over 700 missing U.S. service members. And the work continues today to bring home the remaining missing in action. The United States is also supporting Vietnam to account for their own missing Vietnamese veterans under the Vietnam Wartime Accounting Initiative. And the United States, as President Biden mentioned in his recent visit, is committed to continuing to aid Vietnam in areas such as removal of UXO, dioxin remediation at former U.S. military bases, and supporting people with disabilities. So where are we today? Today, in trade, we've gone from virtually nothing to Vietnam being our 10th largest trading partner. In security cooperation, we've gone from being at war to now having port visits by U.S. aircraft carriers to Vietnam, and a transfer of 3 U.S. Coast Guard cutters to Hanoi. And together, we are combating transnational organized crime and improving Vietnam's ability to maintain maritime domain awareness. In an area like health, again, we've gone from nothing to, in 2021, Vice President Harris launched a new CDC regional office in Hanoi. And in the early days of the pandemic, Vietnam supplied us with over 450,000 hazmat suits and other PPE. In education, over 30,000 Vietnamese students are studying in the United States today, making it the 5th largest group of foreign students in the United States. And since 2022, Vietnam has been hosting U.S. Peace Corps volunteers to teach English. So I think it's fair to say we in Vietnam have come a long way. Indeed, a key part of Secretary Blinken's trip was breaking ground on a new $1.2 billion U.S. Embassy compound in Hanoi, a project that demonstrates our commitment to further improving ties. While we are certainly not allies, we are strategic partners working together against common threats in the region. How did we get there? I would argue that we owe this in key part to those who fought in Vietnam, building people-to-people ties that somehow managed to remain throughout the years, and to our veterans and our family members of the fallen who helped craft that roadmap for our two nations to come together. Thus, as we remember those who died in Vietnam, and indeed in all our wars, it is important to remember that there's much more nuance than simply the state of things at the close of hostilities. I think it's striking that when we look around the world, how many former enemies are now partners or allies. I credit this to the respect with which the U.S. service members are held even by their foes, and to the work veterans and family members of the fallen do to bring countries together. As a nation, we must always remind ourselves of the future that our service members fought and died for, and to do our best to ensure that future comes to pass at home and abroad. All of this, I hope we will remember today as we honor those who made the ultimate sacrifice. May God bless them, and may God bless America.
Thank you, Kristen. And at this particular moment, the best gift that I can imagine for both General Minor and for Kristen Bauer is to welcome some of our Wakefield High School seniors to the stage. And I'd like to call to the podium Joseph Pat, Alejandro Borda, if we can come to the podium. I also would like to know if Kyle is here or Mark. They plan to join, Kyle plans to join in the U.S. Coast Guard, and also Mark. Gentlemen, come on forward. So Joseph Pat has been accepted to the United States Military Academy at West Point. Alejandro has been accepted to attend the United States Naval Academy. At this time, I'd like both General Minor and Kristen Bauer to come forward. We have a couple tokens of thanks and appreciation. So. There's also a story here in Wakefield about the USS Thomas Hudner. I just wanted to present a cap. I know you're going to West Point, but go Army, beat Navy. But that's a cap from the family of the USS Thomas Hudner and the commander and the crew. Got a couple other things here. So these are for you. These are just note cards from Wakefield, okay? I want you to keep in touch with the diplomat, okay? And I want you to keep in touch with the general. If they write to you, please write back. Thank you very much. When you guys see Kyle and Mark, tell them they missed out. The stories of individuals who did not return home are very difficult to share. Today we remember their names to honor the 161 fallen and missing from the town of Wakefield. The Wakefield Girl Scouts will please secure the wreath and place it in the center of the memorial behind the podium. The wreath is a symbol of eternal life, represented by its circular shape. The circular shape has no beginning and no end, and the presentation of the wreath is practiced in many countries around the world, as well in all 50 states. Today, at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in Arlington National Cemetery, it is a custom for our Commander-in-Chief, the President of the United States, to place a wreath at the memorial. These customs are displays of gratitude, as well as public sentiment honoring the fallen and those who did not return home, or those that are still remaining, who are remaining missing. Thank you to the Wakefield Girl Scouts for placing the wreath, and also thank you for your community service with decorating the upper common with American flags. This was the first year that the town of Wakefield prepared a flag garden in honor of the fallen. Next, we remember the fallen in a small ceremony to remember their names from the Battle of Saratoga in 1777 to the global war on terror. Some of the fallen have yet to be identified. These are the missing in action and the prisoners of war who have yet to return home. The Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in Arlington National Cemetery in Virginia is guarded by sentinels from the 3rd United States Infantry Division Regiment, known as the Old Guard. The sentinels guard the tomb every day and every night throughout the year, no matter the weather, and the sentinels march 21 steps down the black mat behind the tomb. They turn and face east for 21 seconds. They turn and face north for 21 seconds, and then they take 21 steps down the mat, always keeping their weapon closest to the visitors. The number 21 symbolizes the highest symbolic military honor that can be bestowed. That is the 21-gun salute. To honor the fallen, 8 volunteers will read 21 names. After each name, the Wakefield Fire Department will ring the bell of peace. We will begin at the Battle of Saratoga in 1777, the Civil War, Spanish-American War, World War I, World War II, the Korean War, the Vietnam War, Desert Shield, Iraqi freedom, and the global war on terror. Please listen as the volunteers read the names of Wakefield's fallen and missing in action. If I can get the readers to come on up. Walter, come on. So if you're a reader, please come to the podium.
Fallen soldiers from the Battle of Saratoga, 1777, in the Civil War. Joshua Eaton, U.S. Army. Sylvester P. Aborn, U.S. Army. Warren Aborn, U.S. Army. George W. Anderson, U.S. Army. N. Ayers Avery, U.S. Army. Robert S. Beckwith, U.S. Army. James Bourne, Jr., U.S. Army. William W. Bryant, U.S. Army. Aaron Burdett, U.S. Army. Charles F. Burdett, U.S. Army. George H. Chandler, U.S. Army. Richard W. Chapman, U.S. Army. Leonard Clifford, U.S. Army. Bernard Conway, U.S. Army. Daniel Conway, U.S. Army. John Cowdrey, U.S. Army. Charles M. Dow, U.S. Army. Edward D. Dunn, U.S. Army. Consider Edmonds, U.S. Army. O'Neill J. Estes, U.S. Army. Franklin H. Foster, U.S. Army.
From the Civil War, Wingate Garland, U.S. Army. George H. Green, U.S. Army. James Hebbets, U.S. Army. Joseph Kelly, U.S. Army. George L. Locke, U.S. Army. Joseph H. Mansfield, U.S. Army. Andrew A. Mason, U.S. Army. John P. McKay, U.S. Army. Thomas M. McKay, U.S. Army. Thomas M. McQuillan, U.S. Army. John L. Moore Jr., U.S. Army. John F. Moses, U.S. Army. Jonathan Pillings, U.S. Army. Frederick S. Richards, U.S. Army. Solon C. Smith, U.S. Army. Frank Snow, U.S. Army. James W. Stimson, U.S. Army. William W. Stimson, U.S. Army. Francis Sweetser, U.S. Army. Luther Sweetser, U.S. Army. Augustus Taylor, U.S. Army.
Fallen from the Civil War, the Spanish-American War, and World War I. Evan Davis Upton, U.S. Army. Alvin S. Warren, U.S. Army. George H. Whitehead, U.S. Army. Augustus T. Wiley, U.S. Army. Herbert A. Wiley, U.S. Army. Samuel A. Wiley, U.S. Army. William Wiley, U.S. Army. John H. Woodfin, U.S. Army. Charles F. Parker, U.S. Army. Herbert E. Biggs, U.S. Army. Robert Gibbs, U.S. Navy. Harry E. Nelson, U.S. Army. Alvin W. Gordon, U.S. Army. William H. Cartland, U.S. Army. Edward S. Merrill, U.S. Army. Henry J. Narcella, U.S. Army. Ambrose P. Hughes, U.S. Marine Corps. Edward M. Fay, U.S. Army. Henry A. Henningar, U.S. Marine Corps. Crowell G. Fish, U.S. Army. Clark R. Lincoln, U.S. Army.
Fallen from World War I, Roy P. Stone, U.S. Army. Nicola D. Fellis, U.S. Army. Thomas E. Muse, U.S. Army. Nicola Valino, U.S. Army. John T. Burns, U.S. Army. George W. Crillon, Jr., U.S. Army. Albert R. Townley, U.S. Army. Bert L. Johnson, U.S. Army. Paul Cartwright, U.S. Army. Patrick Niblin, U.S. Army. Michael J. Gibbons, U.S. Army. Joseph J. Buckley, U.S. Army. John P. Dungan, U.S. Army. John C. Brockbank, U.S. Army. John P. Duggan, U.S. Army. Andrew McLaughlin, U.S. Army. Robert Fitz Baker, U.S. Marine Corps. Walter H. Lund, U.S. Army. James Martino, U.S. Army. Richard P. Merlin, U.S. Army. Raymond E. Smith, U.S. Army.
Thank you. Fallen from World War II, Charles A. DeCecca, U.S. Army. John A. Nudley, U.S. Army. William F. Merrill, U.S. Army. Wendell R. Hovey, U.S. Army. Thomas F. Hurton, Jr., U.S. Army. Maxwell A. Egan, U.S. Navy. Ralph S. Johnson, Jr., U.S. Army. Stephen Kinchunga, U.S. Navy. Henry O. Baril, U.S. Army. George B. DeRoche, Jr., U.S. Army. William H. Ebling, U.S. Army. Lawrence A. Anderson, U.S. Army. George S. Watts, U.S. Army. Peter Colantonio, U.S. Army. Warren D. Goodwin, U.S. Army. Ralph L. Barthelmess, U.S. Navy. William E. LeBlanc, U.S. Army. Peter J. Kokoro, U.S. Navy. Robert G. Rutledge, U.S. Army. Jerry F. Peck, U.S. Army. Dudley F. Holden, U.S. Army.
Fallen from World War II, Charles W. Mills, U.S. Army. Harold N. Godspeed, Jr., U.S. Army. Frank J. Driscoll, Jr., U.S. Army. Calvin W. Curtis, U.S. Army. John J. Muse, Jr., U.S. Army. Kenneth W. Lindsay, U.S. Army. Kenneth A. Webb, U.S. Marine Corps. John Halliday, U.S. Marine Corps. Frank A. Kelly, U.S. Marine Corps. Arthur A. Harper, U.S. Marine Corps. John A. Benedetto, U.S. Army. Carmen A. Storti, U.S. Navy. Robert C. Clement, U.S. Army. Gardner H. Peterson, U.S. Army. Paul R. Krubel, U.S. Army. Frank J. Martin, U.S. Army. Bernard K. Massman, U.S. Army. Hurley W. Lombard, Jr., U.S. Army. George E. Milner, U.S. Army. Frederick H. Mallinson, Jr., U.S. Marine Corps. James H. Ashenden, U.S. Army.
Fallen from World War II, Howard I. Mills, U.S. Army. James K. Hastings, U.S. Army. Robert V. Ewell, U.S. Army. John L. Del Rossi, U.S. Army. Malcolm R. Corbett, U.S. Marine Corps. Edwin F. Emerald, U.S. Army. Guston T. Julian, U.S. Army. Ralph E. Buzzell, U.S. Army. Paul J. Hurton, U.S. Army. Richard L. Porter, U.S. Army. Donald L. Whitehouse, U.S. Army. Dominic A. Croce, U.S. Army. Russell H. Francis, U.S. Army. Wendell L. Vedito, U.S. Marine Corps. Francis E. Babine, U.S. Army. Albert W. Chepelis, U.S. Marine Corps. Felix Tedesco, U.S. Army. Wayne Schuman, U.S. Army. John W. Talbot, U.S. Navy. William J. Reed Jr., U.S. Navy. Philip J. Gillen, U.S. Navy.
Edward A. Adams, U.S. Army. John F. Glenn Jr., U.S. Navy. Robert J. Gorley, U.S. Army. Edward J. Muse Jr., U.S. Marine Corps. Gerald F. Scott, U.S. Army. Richard W. Marson, U.S. Marine Corps. John F. Fitzgibbons, U.S. Army. John P. Leach, U.S. Navy. Peter B. Rich, U.S. Army. Peter B. Schramm, U.S. Marine Corps. Anthony G. Bellardo, U.S. Marine Corps. Harvey A. Dewey Jr., U.S. Marine Corps. Daniel M. Jones, U.S. Navy. Joseph Belavia, U.S. Army.
Thank you. Thank you to the volunteers for reading the names of the fallen in Wakefield, Massachusetts. Ladies and gentlemen, I'd like to introduce the Reverend Brett Johnson. He's the rector at the Emmanuel Episcopal Church here in Wakefield to offer the benediction. The Emmanuel Episcopal Church offers our community a rich history tracing back to the first services according to the Book of Common Prayer held in South Reading in 1849. The parish house and rectory were built in 1902 and 1903. This construction of the Emmanuel Episcopal Church was completed at the same time frame that the Soldiers and Sailors Monument was dedicated to the town of Wakefield, circa 1902. You may have noticed the fencing around the Soldiers and Sailors Monument on the other side of the World War II memorial. The statues have been removed for repair. The Soldiers and Sailors Monument is anticipated to be fully restored with a rededication ceremony at a date to be determined. Stay tuned. Please rise for the benediction from Reverend Johnson.
Beloved neighbors, it's good to see you all. You are all children, siblings, family of the one who created us all. So I'd like you to try something. Would you look around at each other? Go ahead, don't look at me. Look around at each other. Your presence here, all of you, has made this a sacred event. With our hearts open, we honor those who have gone before us, who have given us their lives for our freedoms, and those who are currently serving to allow us to do what we're doing today, to live in peace. All those named today, I believe, rest in wholeness and perfectness and in peace. May we continually honor them by dedicating our lives to the pursuit of peace, to work for the common good, to treat each other, look around, with kindness and mutual high regard, and especially to strive to help those who need our help to thrive, because any nation is judged by how it cares for the needy, the weak, and the lost. May we be those who are inspired by these names we've heard today and motivated to work for justice and especially for peace in this difficult time. Beloved family, colleagues, deep in your hearts, may you know and feel the blessings of the one who created you, the one who loves you, and the one who is with you every single moment. May it be so, and amen.
Thank you, Reverend Johnson. Go ahead and take your seats. We're coming to the conclusion of part one. The 101st Field Artillery Regiment, Boston Light Artillery, is the oldest field artillery regiment in the United States Army, with a lineage dating back to 13 December 1636, when it was organized as the South Regiment. This battery is one of several National Guard units with colonial roots and campaign credit for the War of 1812. To the best of my knowledge, for the first time in Wakefield's history, the battery is offering our fallen the highest symbolic military honor, firing a formal 21-gun salute. Following the 21-gun salute, taps will be played by Wakefield Memorial High School graduating seniors Lila Hathaway and Caroline Dill to conclude today's Memorial Day ceremony. Before we go down to take a look at the guns and the 21-gun salute, I'd like to retire the colors. Color guard, pose. Thank you, Troop 701. Thank everybody that joined us today for remembering our fallen today, and not just today, but every day as we go through about our business here in Wakefield. Please move, at this moment, please move to take a vantage point, a location to view the nation's highest honor. The artillery battery is located at the lower common. The guns are pointed over the lake, okay? You're more than welcome to take pictures. Just do me a favor and stay behind the guns for safety purposes. There's also books about Vietnam on the table over here. If you would like to have one, they're at no cost. They're free, okay, from our veteran service officer.
It's probably gonna be really loud.